The Sphinx sits in the desert, sand on every side, sun beating down for thousands of years, and yet if you look closely at its body you'll see something strange. Deep grooves, wide gaps, rounded edges that look like water carved them slowly over centuries. Not wind, not sand, water. Here's the problem. Egypt hasn't had heavy rain in that region for around 5,000 years, maybe longer. So how did water damage get onto a monument that's supposed to be younger than the dry weather itself? This isn't a small crack somebody noticed once and forgot about. Geologists have walked the enclosure around the Sphinx and mapped the damage inch by inch. They see vertical fissures, deep ones, the kind that form when water sits and soaks into limestone again and again, year after year, for a very long time. Wind erosion looks different. Wind cuts sideways. It polishes stone smooth and low, close to the ground, following the direction the sand blows. What's on the Sphinx doesn't match that pattern at all. The grooves run top to bottom. They're deep and rounded like rain drenched the rock, then dried, then got drenched again. Over and over, for thousands of years. And that's where the disagreement starts. Most Egyptologists say the Sphinx was built around 2500 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. That date fits neatly with the pyramids next to it. It fits the tools we know they had. It fits the history we've pieced together from thousands of other sites. Under that timeline, Egypt was already dry when the Sphinx was carved, so the water damage shouldn't be there. It shouldn't exist. But it does. A geologist named Robert Schoch looked at this weathering back in the 1990s and came to a wild conclusion. He said the damage looks like it came from a much older, much wetter period in Egypt's past. A time called the African Humid period, when the Sahara wasn't a desert at all. Back then, it had lakes, grasslands, actual rainfall, the kind that could slowly wear down stone over centuries. That period ended around 5,000 years ago, or maybe even earlier depending on which researchers you ask. If Schoch is right, the Sphinx would need to be thousands of years older than we think. Maybe carved before the pyramids. Maybe before written history even began in Egypt. Most Egyptologists push back hard on this idea. They point out that there's no other proof of a civilization advanced enough to carve a monument that size before 2500 BCE. No tools, no writing, no cities, nothing. And ancient Egypt didn't just appear out of nowhere. Historians can trace its slow growth, generation by generation, village to kingdom, a gap of a few thousand years with no trace of the people who built the Sphinx doesn't fit the story we know. So now you've got two groups, geologists looking at stone and seeing water, historians looking at the timeline and seeing no room for it. Both sides have evidence. Neither side has been able to fully explain the other away. I find this weirdly comforting, honestly. Not every mystery gets solved with a tidy answer. Sometimes the stone just doesn't agree with the calendar, and we're left standing between two truths that don't fit together, staring at a face that's kept its secret for thousands of years either way. So what exactly is the Sphinx? Where did it come from? And why does something built for one story keep whispering another? Let's look closer. Let's step back for a second. Before we dig into who carved the grooves or when, we should ask a more basic question. What actually is the Sphinx? It sounds like a simple question. Everyone's seen a picture of it. Lion body, human head, sitting in the sand near the pyramids at Giza. But the more you learn about how it was made, the stranger it gets. The Sphinx isn't built out of blocks stacked on top of each other, like the pyramids next to it. It's carved straight out of the ground. One single piece of bedrock. The builders didn't bring the stone to the site. They found a huge slab of limestone already sitting there, and they cut everything else away from around it. What was left standing became the body, the head, the paws stretched out in front. Think about that for a second. This isn't a statue someone built up, it's a shape someone dug down to find. They didn't add material, they removed it. Every piece of extra rock had to be chipped away by hand, using copper tools and stone hammers, until only the shape they wanted was left behind. That's an incredibly hard way to build something. If you carve a block-by-block statue and you mess up a piece, you replace the piece. If you're carving out of solid bedrock and you take off too much stone in the wrong spot, that's it. No do-overs, no fixing it. The whole project has to be planned out ahead of time and then executed almost perfectly, because there's no room for mistakes once you start cutting. So right away, that tells us something. Whoever made the Sphinx, they weren't experimenting. They knew exactly what shape they wanted before they picked up a single tool. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Sphinx isn't just a statue sitting on flat ground. It's sitting inside a pit, a big rectangular hole, carved down into the bedrock, with the Sphinx itself rising up in the middle of it like an island. This pit is called the Sphinx enclosure, and it's the walls of that enclosure where most of the strange weathering shows up. Not just on the body of the Sphinx, but on the walls surrounding it too. That detail matters a lot. It means the water damage isn't only on the statue, it's on the whole space around the statue. Every wall the builders cut into the ground shows the same kind of deep, rounded grooves. That rules out a lot of simple explanations. It's not just one weak spot in the stone. It's not a strange crack from a single flood. It's a pattern, spread across an entire carved-out space, all telling the same story. Let's talk about size for a second, because it helps put this in perspective. The Sphinx is about 240 feet long. That's close to the length of a football field. It's around 66 feet tall, roughly as tall as a 6-story building. And it's all one solid piece of rock, sitting in a pit that had to be carved out first, before the statue could even be shaped. For comparison, the Great Pyramid next to it, the one built for Khafre, used over 2 million separate blocks of stone. Different technique entirely. Blocks were quarried elsewhere, moved, and stacked. The Sphinx didn't need any of that. It just needed someone to remove everything that wasn't the Sphinx. Here's what gets me about this. The head of the Sphinx is smaller than you'd expect for the size of the body. A lot of researchers have pointed this out over the years. If you look at the proportions, the head seems almost too small, like it doesn't quite match the giant lion body underneath it. One idea is that the head was recarved at some point, maybe centuries after the body was first shaped. If the original head was damaged, or maybe represented something else entirely, like the head of a lion instead of a human, later builders might have reshaped it into a human face and made it smaller in the process. That's not a wild claim, by the way. Recarving old statues to fit new rulers or new religious ideas was common in ancient Egypt. Some researchers have gone so far as to say the face on the Sphinx might have originally shown Khafre. Others aren't so sure. There's an old idea, one that's been argued for decades, that the face doesn't perfectly match other statues we know were made of Khafre. It's a small detail, but small details are exactly the kind of thing that keeps this mystery alive. Now let's connect this back to the water damage question, because here's the thing. If the head was recarved later, that means the body could be older than the head. Possibly a lot older. That's an important point, because most of the arguments about weathering focus on the body and the enclosure walls, not the head. So even researchers who believe the Sphinx dates to 2500 BCE sometimes admit the body might have started as something else, an older shape, repurposed and refinished into the lion-bodied guardian we know today. This idea, that the Sphinx may have gone through more than one stage, more than one purpose, changes the whole picture. It's not necessarily one single monument built at one single moment. It might be a very old shape, reused and reshaped by later builders who added the face, added the details, and made it their own. And that brings us to another interesting fact. The Sphinx wasn't always fully visible the way it is today. For long stretches of ancient history it was buried up to its neck in sand. Only the head stuck out above the desert. There's an old carved stone slab called the Dream Stele that tells a story about a young prince named Thutmose. According to the story, he fell asleep near the buried Sphinx and dreamed that it spoke to him. It promised him the throne of Egypt if he would dig it out of the sand. This happened around 1400 BCE, which is over 1,000 years after the Sphinx was supposedly built under Khafre. So even in ancient Egypt, over 1,000 years before Cleopatra, the Sphinx was already old, already buried, already treated like a mysterious relic from an earlier time. The Egyptians who lived near it didn't build it in living memory. To them, it was ancient history too. That matters a lot when you think about how much time has passed since then. We're looking at the Sphinx from a distance of thousands of years, but the ancient Egyptians themselves were already looking at it from a distance. They were already telling stories about it, already treating it like something mysterious from a lost age. I think about this sometimes. How do you even measure the age of something that was already old to the people who left us our oldest records? It's like finding an object today that the Romans already considered ancient and mysterious. That's the strange position we're in with the Sphinx. So when we ask, what is the Sphinx? The honest answer is messier than a single sentence. It's a lion body carved from solid bedrock. It's a pit dug deep into the ground, with weathered walls on every side. It's possibly a head reshaped long after the body was formed, and it's a monument that was already a mystery to the ancient Egyptians themselves, over 1,000 years before anyone in the modern world ever heard its name. It sits there today, half-answered questions built right into its stone. A single object carrying more than one story, more than one age, more than one possible truth. Nobody carved a label into it explaining what it was for. No plaque, no inscription naming the builder, just a lion's body, a human face, and a silence that has outlasted every empire that came after it. And that silence is exactly why the walls matter so much. Because if nobody wrote down the answer, maybe the stone itself remembers. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. That's the whole goal, honestly. Maybe hit subscribe and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I check the comments all the time, and it's fascinating. Someone in Sydney getting ready for their morning coffee. Someone in Berlin during their lunch break. Someone in Texas at 2 a.m, eyes barely open, phone screen dimmed all the way down. All of you, in totally different time zones, thinking about the same old stone sitting in the same desert. It's a strange kind of company, isn't it? Strangers scattered across the planet, all drifting toward the same ancient mystery together. So, let me know where you are. I really do read every single one. Now back to the man who studied those walls in 1990. His name is Robert Schoch. In 1990, he was a geologist at Boston University, not an Egyptologist, not a historian, a geologist. That matters a lot for this story. Schoch spent years studying rocks. He knew how limestone breaks down. He knew the difference between water damage and wind damage, the way a mechanic knows the difference between rust and a dent. So when he first walked up to the Sphinx enclosure, he wasn't looking at a famous statue. He was looking at a rock formation, and what he saw stopped him cold. The walls around the Sphinx showed deep, rolling grooves. Some were several feet deep. They ran down the stone in wavy vertical lines, almost like something had been dripping down the surface for a very long time. Schoch had seen this pattern before, not in Egypt, in places with heavy repeated rainfall, places where water sits on soft rock, soaks in, and slowly eats it away over centuries. He got curious, so he did something simple. He walked the site with a seismograph. This is a tool that sends sound waves into the ground and measures how they bounce back. It tells you how deep certain kinds of weathering go, not just what's on the surface, what's underneath too. The result surprised him. The weathering wasn't shallow, it went down several feet in places. That kind of depth doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen from a few sandstorms either. It takes centuries of water sitting, soaking, and slowly breaking the stone apart. Schoch looked at these numbers and thought about what kind of climate could produce that kind of damage, and that's when things got strange. Egypt, as we know it, is dry, brutally dry. It's been that way for thousands of years. But it wasn't always like this. Long ago, during a period scientists call the African Humid period, North Africa looked completely different. Rivers, lakes, grasslands, rain that actually fell on a regular basis, sometimes heavily. This wetter climate faded out slowly, ending somewhere around 5,000 years ago, maybe a bit later in some regions. Schoch's argument was straightforward. If the damage on the Sphinx enclosure was caused by rain, and Egypt's last major rainy period ended around 5,000 years ago, then the Sphinx has to be older than that. A lot older. Which puts it thousands of years before the accepted date for its construction. That accepted date comes from Egyptologists, and it's tied to a pharaoh named Khafre. Most historians place the Sphinx around 2500 BCE, built during Khafre's reign, around the same time as the pyramids at Giza. That timeline fits neatly with Egyptian records, with tool marks, with the way the whole plateau was built out as one big royal project. Schoch wasn't trying to throw all of that away. But he was pointing at the walls and saying this doesn't add up. If the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BCE, Egypt was already dry by then. Rainfall wasn't heavy enough to carve grooves like that, so either the weathering came from somewhere else, or the Sphinx is way older than anyone thought. To back this up, he didn't just rely on his own eyes. He brought in a colleague, a seismologist named Thomas de Becky, to run more precise readings around the enclosure. De Becky's equipment mapped the depth of weathering at several points along the walls. The numbers lined up with Schoch's suspicion. The stone had been worn down in a pattern that matched slow water damage, not quick sandblasting from wind. Here's what gets me about this part of the story. Schoch wasn't some outsider with a wild theory and no training. He had degrees from Yale. He'd built a career studying rock formation and erosion patterns around the world. When he stood in front of the world's most famous monument and said, "This doesn't look like wind damage to me," people had to listen, even if they didn't agree. And a lot of people didn't agree. Egyptologists pushed back hard. Their argument was just as reasonable as Schoch's. They said there are other explanations for those grooves. Maybe it wasn't rain from thousands of years earlier. Maybe it was something more recent, something that didn't need a completely new timeline to explain. One idea points to something surprisingly simple. Water doesn't only come from rain falling straight down. It also comes from something called capillary action. This is when water gets soaked up from underground and moves upward through stone, almost like a paper towel pulling up liquid. Egypt does get occasional flash floods, and moisture in the ground can rise up through limestone slowly over time, especially if the water table shifts or if sand covers the base for long stretches. Some geologists argue the Sphinx sat buried in sand for most of its life. Not the whole thing, just the body, up to the neck. Only the head stuck out above the sand for centuries at a time, maybe longer. If that's true, moisture trapped underneath the sand could have worked its way up through the limestone from below, not from rain falling on top. That would create similar-looking grooves without needing thousands of extra years on the clock. Another theory focuses on the limestone itself. The layers used to carve the Sphinx aren't all the same quality. Some layers are harder, some are much softer, almost crumbly. Softer limestone breaks down fast, even with regular exposure to wind, sand, and occasional light rain showers, the kind Egypt still gets once in a while even today. If the softer layers wore down quickly while the harder ones stayed solid, you'd get an uneven, wavy pattern. That pattern might look like heavy rain damage, even if it wasn't. So you've got three competing explanations sitting side by side. Schoch's theory says heavy sustained rainfall over centuries, pointing to a much older Sphinx. The flash flood and groundwater theory says shorter bursts of water moving through buried stone, no extra thousands of years required. And the soft limestone theory says it's simply about the type of rock, not the amount of water at all. None of these theories has fully won. Schoch stuck by his conclusion for decades. He kept refining his data, kept publishing, kept defending the idea that the Sphinx enclosure shows signs of prolonged water exposure that don't fit a 4,500-year-old monument. Mainstream Egyptology kept pushing back, pointing to construction records, tool marks nearby, and the fact that everything else on the plateau lines up with Khafre's era. Here's what I think is genuinely interesting, and it's not really about who's right. It's about what this argument reveals. A single wall, made of stone, can hold two completely different stories depending on who's reading it. A geologist sees water, an Egyptologist sees stone quality and flash floods. Both are trained, both are looking at the exact same grooves, and they walk away with different timelines for one of the most famous objects on Earth. That's the strange part about old stone. It doesn't come with a label, it doesn't explain itself, it just sits there, worn down by something, and we're left guessing what that something was. Schoch's theory never became the accepted view. Most historians and archaeologists still place the Sphinx around 2500 BCE, but his work didn't disappear either. It sits there in the background of every documentary, every debate, every late-night rabbit hole about ancient Egypt. It's the reason people still stop and stare at those grooves and wonder if the story we've been told is the full one. And maybe that's the real value of what he did. Not proving a new date, just making people look closer, making people ask questions about a monument they thought they already understood completely. Because here's the thing about the Sphinx, it's been sitting in that desert for so long that we've stopped really seeing it. We see photos, we see postcards, we see it as a symbol, almost like a logo for ancient Egypt. Schoch walked up to it as a piece of rock, nothing more, and the rock told him a story that didn't match the label everyone had already attached to it. Whether he was right or wrong, that's a strange kind of gift. A reminder that even the most famous, most photographed object in the world can still hold a mystery. Something written right there on its surface, in grooves and cracks, waiting for someone patient enough to actually read it. He needed something to compare against. That's just good science. One weathered wall doesn't tell you much on its own. You need a second data point, something built at roughly the same moment, using the same tools, by the same people. So Schoch looked around Giza for buildings that could serve as a kind of control group, and he found exactly what he needed, standing just a short walk away. The tombs of Khafre's officials sit near the Sphinx. Same plateau, same limestone, same era, according to the standard timeline. These aren't mystery buildings. Egyptologists know exactly who built them and roughly when. The names are carved right into some of them. So if the Sphinx enclosure and these tombs came from the same century, they should have aged the same way. Same wind, same sand, same rare desert rain, same 4,500 years of exposure. They didn't age the same way, not even close. The tombs show a totally different kind of wear. Their surfaces are worn down, sure, but the damage looks sharp and angular. Edges are chipped, corners are knocked off. Flat faces are pitted in small scattered spots, almost like the stone got sandblasted over time, which in a sense it did. Wind carries sand across the desert floor, and over centuries that sand acts like sandpaper. It scrapes, it polishes, it cuts in straight horizontal patterns because that's the direction the wind blows. That's completely different from what shows up on the Sphinx walls. Remember those deep, wavy grooves running up and down? Vertical lines rolling and smooth, some cut several feet into the rock. Nothing like that appears on the tombs. Nothing close. The tombs look like they spent thousands of years getting worn down by dry wind and blowing grit. The Sphinx enclosure looks like it spent a long stretch of time getting soaked over and over by water running down its face. This is the comparison that really got people's attention, because it's not just Schoch's opinion against Egyptology's opinion anymore. It's stone against stone. Same plateau, same rock type, same age, if the standard dates are right. And yet one set of walls looks like it survived a desert. The other looks like it survived a rainforest. Think about what that means. If both structures are the same age, they should show matching wear patterns. Dry climate erosion on both, or wet climate erosion on both. Instead, you get one of each, sitting practically side by side. That's the puzzle Schoch pointed at again and again throughout his career, not, here's proof the Sphinx is ancient. More like, here's a contradiction that somebody needs to explain. His answer to the contradiction was that the two structures probably aren't the same age at all. The tombs, built during Khafre's reign, only had dry conditions to wear them down, because by that point in history, Egypt's rainy climate had already ended. The Sphinx enclosure, on the other hand, had to be much older, carved back when heavy rains still fell across the region. Old enough that it caught the tail end of that wetter climate and got shaped by centuries of water before the desert took over completely. That's a bold claim. It pushes the Sphinx back thousands of years earlier than anyone in mainstream archaeology is comfortable with. But Schoch wasn't just pointing at grooves and guessing. He had the seismic readings, he had the depth measurements, and now he had this side-by-side comparison, showing two neighbouring structures that had clearly weathered in two very different ways. Critics had answers for this too, and their answers matter just as much as Schoch's argument. One point they raised is really simple. The Sphinx isn't shaped like the tombs, it sits lower. It was carved down into a hollow, almost like a bowl cut into the bedrock. That shape matters a lot. A low enclosure can trap water after rare desert storms. It can hold humidity longer than a raised structure exposed to open air. Flash floods in Egypt are rare, but they do happen, and when they do, water can pool in low areas and sit there for days. The tombs stand up above ground level. Water runs off them fast. It never really has a chance to sit and soak in. So even without thousands of extra years, and even without a lost rainy climate, you might expect the two structures to weather differently, just because of their shape and position. One collects water, one sheds it. There's also the matter of stone quality, something we touched on before, but that applies directly here too. The layers of limestone used for the Sphinx aren't uniform. Some layers are soft, almost chalky. Others are dense and hard. If the tombs happen to be built from harder blocks, or built using stone from a different layer of the quarry, they'd naturally hold up better against the same weather, over the same amount of time. You wouldn't need water at all to explain the difference, just tougher rock. So now you've got two full explanations sitting across from each other. Schoch says different weathering patterns mean different ages, and the age gap has to be enormous, stretching back to a wetter Egypt. His critics say different weathering patterns can come from shape, position, and rock quality, all without touching the accepted timeline at all. Neither side has fully convinced the other. Schoch published detailed papers walking through his measurements. He brought in outside experts to double-check his seismic data. He kept insisting that the depth of weathering on the Sphinx enclosure walls, several feet down in places, simply couldn't form in a dry desert climate, no matter what shape the enclosure was. Mainstream Egyptologists kept pointing back to construction records, matching tool marks, and the layout of the whole Giza complex as one unified building project under Khafre. Here's what I find genuinely striking about this specific piece of the puzzle. It's not really about who wins the argument. It's about how much information sits inside a comparison like this. One tomb, one enclosure, same hill, same rock, same builders, at least according to the official record. And from that single side-by-side look, you get two completely different stories about how time moves across stone. That's the strange gift buried in this whole debate. Most of the time, we walk past old buildings and just see age as one single thing. Old is old, but age doesn't wear evenly. It depends on shape, it depends on rock, it depends on what kind of weather got there first, and how long that weather stuck around. The tombs and the Sphinx sat in the same desert for supposedly the same stretch of centuries, and they came out looking like they'd lived two entirely different lives. Maybe that's the real lesson here, more than any specific date. Stone remembers weather. It just doesn't remember it in words. It remembers in grooves, in pits, in smooth curves versus sharp edges. And when two neighbouring structures remember their history so differently, you're left with a genuine mystery, not a solved one, just a real one, sitting quietly in the sand, waiting for someone to explain why one wall got soaked, while the wall right next to it just got sandblasted for a few thousand years instead. So we have to find the rain, not the rain that falls once and dries up, the kind that falls for centuries, the kind that soaks into rock year after year, until it changes the shape of stone forever. And it turns out, Egypt used to have exactly that. Scientists call it the African Humid period. That's a fancy name for a simple idea. Long ago, the Sahara wasn't a desert. It was green. Picture that for a second. Where sand dunes stretch out today, there used to be grasslands, lakes, rivers that actually flowed. Trees grew where nothing grows now. Animals like giraffes and hippos wandered through areas that are bone dry today. This wasn't a jungle. It wasn't tropical, but it was wet enough to support life. Wet enough for real rivers. Wet enough for actual seasons of rain. The kind that falls hard and often. Climate scientists figured this out mostly by studying lake mud. Old lake beds in the Sahara hold layers of sediment like pages in a book. Each layer tells you what the climate looked like when it settled. Dry years leave one kind of dust. Wet years leave another. By reading these layers, scientists built a timeline, and that timeline is clear. Around 9,000 years ago, the Sahara was green and getting greener. Rain fell across North Africa on a regular basis. This wasn't a rumour or a guess. It's written into the ground itself. Cave paintings back this up too. Deep in the Sahara, in places like the Gilf Kabir in Egypt, there are rock paintings thousands of years old. They show swimmers, people diving into water, herds of cattle grazing on grass. None of that makes sense in today's desert. But it makes perfect sense if the land used to look completely different. Somebody painted what they saw, and what they saw was water. So the Green Sahara wasn't a myth, it was real. Scientists agree on that. What they argue about is the timing. When exactly did the rain stop? When did green turn back to sand? This is where things get interesting for the Sphinx. Most estimates put the end of the wet period somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 years ago. Some researchers push it a little further back. Others think parts of Egypt held on to wetter conditions a bit longer than the deep Sahara did. The shift wasn't instant either. It's not like the rain just stopped on one specific afternoon. The land dried out slowly. Rainfall became less frequent. Lakes shrank. Rivers weakened. Over the course of a few hundred years, Wet Egypt became dry Egypt. Here's why that matters so much. Standard history says the Sphinx was built around 2500 BC during the reign of Khafre. That puts its construction well after most estimates for when the rain stopped. By that point, according to the mainstream timeline, Egypt should have already been dry for a long stretch. Dry enough that heavy water damage on a brand new monument doesn't add up. But Schoch's argument runs the other way. He says the water damage on the Sphinx enclosure needs way more time to form than the official date allows, not hundreds of years, thousands. If he's right, the wear didn't happen during Khafre's era at all. It happened earlier, possibly much earlier, back when the wetter Saharan climate still reached into Egypt, back when actual rainstorms rolled across the plateau on a regular basis, not the odd freak storm every few decades. That means his theory and the Green Sahara data are talking about the same window of time. If the water damage really needed centuries of repeated rainfall to form, and the region only had that kind of steady rain before around 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, then the enclosure has to be older than the accepted date. A lot older. This is the part that gets people arguing at conferences. Critics point out that wetter than today doesn't mean rainy enough to carve deep grooves into limestone. The Green Sahara was mostly grassland and light rain, similar to a savanna. It wasn't a rainforest. It wasn't constant downpours. Even during the wettest stretch, most of Egypt still saw rain only, part of the year, and it likely came and went in patterns, not a steady soak for 1,000 straight years. There's also a geography problem. The Green Sahara mostly affected areas west and south of Egypt. The core Nile Valley, where Giza sits, may have stayed drier than the deep desert regions further out. Some climate models show heavier rain reaching Egypt during this period. Other models show a smaller effect, with most of the moisture landing elsewhere and Egypt only getting a partial share. Scientists don't fully agree on how much rain actually touched the Giza Plateau, even during the wettest centuries. So you end up with two camps, both looking at the same climate data and reading it differently. One camp says, the rain was real, it lasted long enough, and it reached far enough to explain the Sphinx's water damage. If the enclosure was carved even a couple thousand years before Khafre, it would have caught the last real stretch of that wetter climate. Centuries of seasonal rain soaking into soft limestone, carving grooves slowly over time. Then the desert crept in, the rain stopped, and the monument spent the rest of its life just sitting there, barely changing, preserved by dry air the same way a fossil gets preserved in dry rock. The other camp says, even if some rain reached Giza during the Green Sahara period, it probably wasn't heavy enough, or long-lasting enough, to explain grooves several feet deep. They argue you'd need something closer to true tropical rainfall, sustained for a very long stretch. And nothing in the data proves Egypt ever had that. A slightly wetter savanna climate is not the same as the kind of drenching required to reshape solid rock. Both sides are working with real numbers, real sediment cores, real rock art. This isn't people making things up. It's people looking at the same mud, the same paintings, the same models, and drawing different lines through the data. Here's what I find interesting about this piece of the mystery. It's not really about who's right. It's about how thin the line is between this fits and this doesn't. A few thousand years one direction, and the Green Sahara explains everything. A few thousand years the other direction, and it explains nothing at all. Climate science can narrow the window. It can't nail it shut. And that's the strange position we're in right now. We know Egypt used to be green. We know the rain stopped at some point. We even have a rough range for when that shift happened. What we don't have is proof connecting that exact window to the exact moment someone carved into the Giza bedrock. The dates are close enough to make people argue, not close enough to make anyone certain. Think about that for a second. An entire climate shift, written in lake mud and cave paintings, sitting right next to an ancient monument that might or might not remember that same lost rain. Two kinds of evidence, both real, both solid in their own way, and still not quite touching. That gap between maybe and proven is where this whole debate lives. Schoch looked at grooves in limestone and saw water. Climate scientists looked at old lake beds and saw a wetter Sahara. Both of them are almost certainly seeing something true. The only question left is whether those two truths line up on the same calendar. Right now, nobody can say for sure. The dates just barely miss each other, or just barely touch, depending on which model you trust. And somewhere in that fog of maybe, there's a number, a real one, a date some researchers have proposed for the Sphinx enclosure that would settle at least part of this argument. Robert Schoch didn't just study the walls and walk away. He wanted a number, a real date he could defend in front of other scientists. So he teamed up with a seismologist named Thomas de Beckie, and they tried something different. Instead of just looking at the surface, they measured what was happening underground. Here's how it works. Sound waves travel through rock at different speeds depending on how weathered that rock is. Fresh, solid limestone lets sound move through fast. Weathered limestone, the kind that's been broken down by water over long stretches of time, slows sound waves down. It's soft, cracked, full of tiny gaps. De Beckie set up equipment around the Sphinx enclosure. He sent sound waves into the ground and measured how they bounced back. And the results were strange. The weathering wasn't just on the surface. It went deep, 6 feet down in some spots. That's not what wind damage looks like. Wind wears down the surface of a rock. It doesn't reach 6 feet into solid limestone. Water does that. Water seeps in, freezes, expands, cracks the stone from the inside out, over and over, for centuries. Based on how deep the weathering went and how fast that kind of damage tends to happen, Schoch came up with a number. He proposed the Sphinx enclosure could be at least 7,000 to 7,500 years old. Some of his later estimates pushed even further back, into territory that would put the carving before 5000 BC, maybe long before it. Stop and think about what that means. The official story says the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BC. Schoch's number suggests it could be twice that age, or more. Not a small correction, not maybe a century earlier. A completely different timeline for one of the most famous monuments on Earth. Naturally, this got people's attention, and not in a good way if you were Schoch. Egyptologists pushed back hard, fast. The pushback wasn't just about feelings or tradition either. There were real scientific objections, and they're worth taking seriously. The first objection is about the seismic data itself. Critics pointed out that the ground around the Sphinx isn't uniform. It's not one solid block of limestone from top to bottom. It's made of different layers, some naturally softer than others, laid down millions of years ago when this whole area sat under an ancient sea. So when de Beckie's equipment found deep weathering, was that really water damage from rain? Or was it just softer natural rock that had always been that way, water or no water? This is a real problem. Limestone forms in layers, like a cake. Some layers are harder, some are naturally crumbly. If the deep weathering de Beckie found was actually just a naturally soft layer of rock, then the whole seismic argument falls apart. It wouldn't prove ancient rainfall at all. It would just prove the ground under Giza is complicated, which nobody was arguing against in the first place. Schoch responded to this. He said the pattern of weathering matched water damage specifically, not just soft rock in general. But other geologists remained unconvinced. And this is where the debate has mostly stayed stuck for over 30 years. Two groups of trained scientists, looking at the same seismic readings, reaching different conclusions. There's a second objection, and it's just as serious. It's about how limestone actually erodes. Different types of limestone break down at wildly different speeds. Some limestone is dense and tough. It resists water for a long time. Other limestone is soft and grainy. It falls apart fast, even with just a little bit of moisture. The rate of erosion isn't a fixed number you can apply everywhere. It depends on the exact chemistry of the specific stone in front of you. Critics argued that Schoch's timeline assumed a slow, steady rate of weathering, based on comparisons to other rock formations in other parts of the world. But Giza's limestone might not behave the same way. If this particular stone erodes faster than Schoch assumed, then you wouldn't need thousands of extra years to explain the grooves. You might only need a few centuries of occasional heavy rain, even during a mostly dry period. That would fit the standard timeline just fine. This is the part that keeps this whole mystery alive. It's not that one side has facts and the other side has guesses. Both sides have facts. They just disagree on how to read them. There's a third piece to this too, one that doesn't get talked about as much. Some geologists have pointed out that acid rain today, caused by modern pollution, can eat away at limestone incredibly fast. Faster than anyone would have guessed 100 years ago. If ancient rainfall combined with certain soil chemicals, or if underground water seeped upward into the stone in a way we don't fully understand yet, the timeline could shift again. Maybe not thousands of years, maybe just a few hundred. Nobody has fully ruled this out, so where does that leave us? Right now, the mainstream position is still that the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BC during Khafre's rule. Most Egyptologists stand firmly behind this. They point to construction techniques, tool marks, and connections to other buildings from that same era that all line up neatly with Khafre's reign. From their side, the weathering can be explained by a mix of soft, natural rock layers and rare heavy rainstorms during Egypt's early dynastic period. You don't need a lost civilization. You don't need thousands of extra years. You just need normal geology, doing what normal geology does. But Schoch's position hasn't disappeared either. He's still out there, still publishing, still defending his numbers using updated seismic studies and new comparisons to weathering patterns around the world. He's not saying he has it all figured out. He's saying the official timeline doesn't fully explain what he's seeing in the rock. And honestly, that's a fair thing to say out loud, even if you don't agree with his final number. Here's what gets me about this whole debate. It's not really a fight between science and nonsense. It's a fight between two different scientific approaches. One side trusts written history, architectural comparisons, and the broader pattern of ancient Egyptian building techniques. The other side trusts geology, rock chemistry, and the physical behavior of stone underwater. Both approaches are legitimate, both have blind spots. Think about how strange that is. A 5,000-year-old monument, and we still can't fully agree on when it was made. Not because nobody's looked closely. People have studied every inch of that limestone, measured it, sampled it, argued about it in academic journals for over 3 decades, and it still comes down to which kind of evidence you trust more. Maybe that's just the nature of ancient stone. It doesn't come with a label. It doesn't tell you the year it was cut. It only shows you the damage life left behind and asks you to guess how that damage got there. Wind or rain. A few centuries or a few thousand years. A quiet rain in 2500 BC, or something older, wetter, and mostly forgotten. That gap between maybe and we know for sure is where the Sphinx has been sitting quietly for a very long time, watching people argue about its own age, never once giving them a straight answer. So now we get to the real heart of the argument. Why do so many experts in geology and Egyptology think the rain theory doesn't hold up? What are the strongest reasons people have given against the idea that rain, lots of it, over centuries, carved those deep, curving grooves? This isn't just about stubbornness or defending old textbooks. These are smart people who know rocks inside and out. They've put serious thought into every inch of this debate. Their reasons matter, and if we care about the truth, we have to look at them closely. Let's start with the oldest and maybe simplest pushback. The geology of the Giza Plateau is a huge mess. It looks organised from far away, flat layers of stone sitting like a cake. But when you zoom in, it's a jumble. Layers twist and turn. Some parts are hard as marble. Others crumble between your fingers. Millions of years ago, this was a sea. That's where all the limestone came from, seashells and ancient animals pressed into rock. But seas aren't tidy. Waves, currents and storms lay down layers in weird ways. Sometimes you get tough solid beds. Other times you wind up with crumbly pockets mixed right in. That leads to the first big argument. Maybe the Sphinx enclosure just hit a weird patch of rock. Maybe the deep grooves and rounded shapes aren't about rain at all. Maybe they're just what happens when a monument is carved into a spot where the limestone was already weak and full of holes. If you dig into a Swiss cheese block, you're going to see pits and channels. That's not weathering. That's just bad luck. Critics say, show me proof that water is the only thing that could have carved those shapes. Show me these exact grooves formed by rain in other places, not just here. Now, Robert Schoch and his supporters reply that the grooves look like textbook examples of water erosion. They show side-by-side pictures: Sphinx wall, English countryside, limestone cliffs in France, all shaped by streams and heavy rain. But critics come back with their own photos. They show rock faces shaped by wind, sand, and even salt. The same kind of rounded shapes can show up for other reasons. The rock itself can change the rules. If you pick the right or wrong kind of limestone, you can get almost any pattern you want, rain or no rain. The next argument is about the climate. We already talked about the African humid period when rain soaked North Africa, and the Sahara was green. But here's the catch. Nobody can agree on exactly when those wet years ended or how wet it really got near Giza. Some climate models say the wet period ended around 5000 BC, others push it later or earlier. But even if you accept that it rained a lot, was it enough to do this much damage to the stone? Egyptologists say no. They point out that even during the wettest times, Giza was never a rainforest. It had seasons of heavy rain, but not the kind that would make waterfalls or rivers to carve out deep channels. They ask, where's the evidence of ponds, streams or lakes right next to the Sphinx? Where's all the mud, clay and plant remains you'd expect if this place was flooded year after year? And here's where it gets tricky. The Sphinx sits on high ground, not in a valley. Water runs away from it, not toward it. For rain to do that much damage, it'd have to pour down the walls over and over for centuries. But if that happened, why don't we see the same kind of water damage on the nearby pyramids, or on other temples just a stone's throw away? Many of those buildings are made from the same type of limestone, and they've stood exposed for just as long, at least if you believe the standard timeline. But their walls mostly show flat, sharp-edged weathering, not the deep, rolling curves you see in the Sphinx pit. Critics argue, if rain did this, it should have left more evidence all over the place, not just in one spot. Let's go deeper into that point. The Sphinx sits in a pit, with walls cut down into bedrock. Some say this shape acts like a rain trap, focusing water and making erosion worse. But others point out that if you dig a hole in the ground, rainwater pools and soaks in. That could speed up weathering. Or maybe, if the pit was filled in for most of history, as some records suggest, then it would have been protected from rain, not more exposed. If you believe the Sphinx was buried up to its neck in sand for most of its life, how could rain get to the walls at all? Wouldn't the sand act like a blanket, blocking the water and keeping the rock dry? Some researchers argue this is a deal-breaker for the rain theory. They say, the pit was full of sand, so rain couldn't have done anything. Another angle is tool marks and construction methods. Egyptologists love their stone tools and chisel marks. They point out that the style of carving, the tool marks on the walls, and the blocks used to repair the Sphinx all match what's found in other tombs and temples from Khafre's time, around 2500 BC. They say, if somebody built this monument thousands of years earlier, where's the rest of their stuff? Where are the other buildings, statues, tools, and pottery from that lost civilization? It's not just about the Sphinx. It's about the whole culture you'd need to build something this big. Critics argue, you can't have a lost people who only left us one giant cat and nothing else. That brings us to another problem, the Sphinx restoration stela. This is an ancient stone slab placed between the Sphinx's paws. It was put there by Pharaoh Thutmose IV, who lived more than 1,000 years after Khafre. On the stela, Thutmose talks about the Sphinx being buried up to its neck in sand, and how he cleared it out. Egyptologists use this story to argue that the monument was already in rough shape, partly buried, partly exposed, long before anyone started talking about ancient rain. If the Sphinx was covered in sand for centuries, how could rain have damaged the walls? Wouldn't the sand have protected it? Now, let's shift to the chemistry side. Limestone isn't just one thing, it's a whole family of rocks that look similar but behave differently. Some are full of clay and impurities that help water break them down faster. Others are almost pure and can stand up to rain for ages with almost no change. Geologists have taken samples from the area and tested them in labs. They found that the Sphinx's limestone is extra soft in some places, especially near the bottom. This softness makes it more likely to erode, even with just a little bit of water or even changing temperatures. Critics say, you don't need centuries of rain to explain these grooves. You just need soft rock and a few heavy rainstorms over a couple of hundred years, maybe even less. Here's another twist. Some experts think the damage is actually older than the Sphinx itself. They point out that the people who carved the statue may have picked a spot where the stone was already weathered, maybe by groundwater or ancient sea action long before humans showed up. If that's true, the deep grooves and rounded shapes could have been there before a single tool touched the rock. The builders might have just worked with what they had, sculpting the body and head into something new but leaving the old scars untouched. This theory says, maybe the Sphinx is younger, but the rock it's carved from is much, much older, and that's what we're seeing. Some researchers have even looked at salt and minerals that collect on limestone in places like Giza. When groundwater rises and then dries out, salt crystals form inside the rock. Over time, these tiny crystals expand and break the stone apart from the inside. It's a slow, steady process that can make deep cracks and grooves, even without much rain at all. The mix of salt, sand, and changing temperatures can do a lot of damage. Critics of the rain theory point to studies showing that salt weathering can be just as powerful as water erosion, and maybe even faster under the right conditions. There's also the matter of how we date things. Egyptologists love written records, names carved in stone, and pottery styles that change over time. They point to the Sphinx's head, which matches other faces from the Old Kingdom, especially the face of Khafre. The body is weirdly small for the head, but the style fits the art from that period. They argue that if the statue was made by a forgotten culture thousands of years earlier, the head should look totally different. Art styles change a lot over long stretches of history, but here the face looks like it belongs right in the middle of Egypt's 4th dynasty. Critics say, if you move the date back, you have to explain why the art style is so much like everything else from Khafre's time. Let's not forget about the restoration work. Ancient Egyptians fixed up the Sphinx at least twice, maybe more. They patched holes, replaced broken blocks, and even tried to shore up the body with extra layers of stone. Some of these repairs are carved with inscriptions naming the pharaohs who did the work. Egyptologists argue that if the statue was already ancient and badly damaged before these kings were even born, Wouldn't they have mentioned that? Wouldn't there be stories about how they found a mysterious weathered monument from a lost time? Instead, the records talk about fixing up an important, but not mysterious statue that was already part of their world. Here's another objection, and it's a big one. There's no sign of massive floods or giant rainstorms in the dirt around the Sphinx. If rain carved deep grooves, you'd expect to find thick layers of mud, clay, or silt trapped at the bottom of the pit. Archaeologists have dug all around the area. They found some sand and a little bit of gravel, but nothing like the thick, wet layers you'd expect from centuries of flooding. Critics argue this is strong evidence against the rain theory. They say, where's the dirt? Where's the mud? If water did all this, it should have left a mess behind. And while we're at it, let's talk about damage from wind and sand. Some geologists argue that the strange shapes on the walls could come from wind-driven sand, especially in a place like Giza, where storms can blast the rock for years at a time. Over centuries, sand can eat away at stone, smoothing sharp edges and cutting deep hollows. The pattern might not look like classic wind erosion, but nature doesn't always follow the rules. Critics show examples from deserts all over the planet, where wind and sand have made grooves and curves that look a lot like what we see near the Sphinx. There's a final, more philosophical argument too. It's about how science works. The rain theory is dramatic. It asks us to stretch our timeline way back, to imagine a world before Egypt as we know it, full of lost builders and forgotten stories. But science, as most experts see it, favours the simplest answer that fits the facts. The rain theory, they argue, asks for a lot of extra pieces. A lost civilization, missing records, more rain than anyone can prove. The standard story, with its focus on known pharaohs, familiar art, and regular old rocks, explains everything with fewer guesses. Critics say, why reach for the wildest answer when simpler ones are still on the table? But here's something interesting. Even the strongest critics admit there are some things about the Sphinx that don't quite add up. Maybe the weathering doesn't match the rest of Giza. Maybe the pit is unique. Maybe the climate data is fuzzy. They don't claim to know every answer. They just think the rain theory has more holes than solid ground. And that's the heart of the case against geology as the final judge. Rocks can tell us a lot. But rocks are messy, full of surprises. Nature doesn't always leave us a clean trail to follow. Every time we look closer, another theory pops up. Sometimes it feels like the more we learn, the more mysterious things become. Still, it's worth remembering that debate itself is a good thing. When experts argue, new ideas come out. Old ideas get tested. Sometimes the truth is boring. Sometimes it's wild. Most of the time, it's somewhere in the middle, hiding in plain sight. So what should we do with all these objections? How do we balance the rain theory against the official story? Maybe we just keep asking questions. Maybe we accept that, for now, some mysteries stay unsolved. And yet, even after all this, the strongest argument against the rain theory isn't really about rocks or erosion. It's not about limestone or tool marks or missing mud. It's about something else entirely, something that goes beyond geology and even history. But that's where we're headed next. Because the biggest challenge to the rain theory is waiting just outside the stone walls. It doesn't come from the earth at all. So, rock aside, there's a harder question waiting. Why do so many experts say we can't trust archaeology to solve this mystery? Why do people who study ancient cultures, buildings, and buried objects push back against the rain theory so strongly? Let's dig into that angle. Because honestly, this is where the debate shifts. It's not just about science. It's about how we decide what's real when the evidence is old, messy, and incomplete. First, think about how archaeology works. It's not a perfect science. It's part detective work, part puzzle, part guesswork. People dig up pieces, broken pots, bones, bits of wall, old tools. Most of the time, they're not finding whole cities or giant statues, they're finding crumbs. From those crumbs, they try to build a picture of what life was like. And here's the thing, there are always gaps, always missing pieces, sometimes huge ones. Now, when it comes to the Sphinx and the rain theory, archaeology faces a big problem. If you claim the statue is much older than everyone thought, you're not just moving a date. You're saying there was a lost world here, one that built massive stone monuments, then vanished without a trace. But where's the rest of it? Where are the small things? The everyday stuff people leave behind? That's what archaeologists focus on. Walk through almost any ancient site, and you'll find the remains of daily life. Broken cups, bits of food, trash pits, graves, tools worn down by use. Even in places that have been empty for thousands of years, you find signs that real people were there, living regular lives. If the Sphinx and its pit were created before the known pharaohs, shouldn't there be signs of those earlier builders? Not just big sculptures, but little things, pottery, bones, maybe even scraps of clothing. But so far, nothing like that has turned up at Giza. The artifacts all fit the timeline of the pharaohs. The tools and pottery in the layers around the Sphinx match the stuff found everywhere else in Old Kingdom Egypt. Carvings, tombs and temples all fit together. There's no clear sign of a forgotten culture buried under all of it. Archaeologists keep waiting for a surprise, a stone tablet in a weird language, a different style of pottery or some new kind of building. But year after year, dig after dig, nothing like that shows up. This is a problem for the rain theory. Because if someone built the Sphinx long before the pyramids, there should be a trail. Some physical sign that a different group of people was here doing things their own way, but the ground is silent. No tools, no writing, nothing out of place. The oldest layers are still just sand and rock, and here's where archaeology gets stubborn. People who study ancient sites believe patterns matter. If you find something huge, a statue, a temple, you expect to find the smaller things too. It's like finding a giant sandcastle on a beach, but no footprints, no toys, no buckets, no shovel marks. Where's the evidence of the builders? Archaeologists say, show me their stuff, not just their sculpture. Until that happens, they feel safe trusting the old timeline. Let's get even more specific. The Sphinx is surrounded by temples, tombs and causeways. All these buildings are made from the same kind of limestone and are cut in the same style. The blocks fit together the way other Old Kingdom buildings do. The carvings and statues nearby show the same faces, the same kind of art, the same gods and pharaohs. If the Sphinx was ancient before all of this, wouldn't the style be different? Wouldn't the stonework stand out? But everything matches. It all fits in the puzzle of Egypt's fourth dynasty. There's another thing to consider: writing. The Egyptians loved to write things down. They carved records in stone, painted scenes on tomb walls, and wrote on papyrus, an early kind of paper. They recorded the names of kings, gods, and even the workers who built the pyramids. If the Sphinx was built by a vanished culture, why didn't anyone mention it? Why didn't later Egyptians say, "We found this old statue and made it our own"? Or write about how it was already ancient when they arrived? Instead, the first records we have treat the Sphinx as part of the world they knew. It's already there, already tied to their kings and their gods. Some people argue that records could have been lost. That's true. Fires, floods, and time destroy almost everything. But even when writing is gone, archaeologists find clues. Changes in art, in burial style, in tools. These things show when a new group moves in. But in Egypt, those changes are missing. The culture flows smoothly from one period to the next with no big gaps. It's like a river with no sudden bends or waterfalls. Now let's talk about the size of the problem. The Sphinx isn't a small statue hidden in the sand. It's huge. Carved from a single ridge of limestone, the body stretches over 240 feet. The paws alone are almost 50 feet long. Sculpting something this big isn't a weekend project. You need hundreds of workers, special tools, a plan, and the power to order people around. That means a government, a leader, food supplies, and all the things that make a real society work. If such a group existed before the pharaohs, where are their other works? Where's their city? Where are their farms, their wells, their roads? The Old Kingdom left plenty of these behind, and so did later civilizations. But for this mysterious earlier group, there's nothing, just the Sphinx sitting alone. Archaeologists ask, how could a culture big enough to build this have vanished so completely? It's not impossible for things to disappear, but it's rare. Even in places where cities fell and civilizations died out, you usually find leftovers. Broken tools, ruined walls, graves. Here, there's only sand. Some people say the desert swallowed everything. That's possible, but it's not what we see in the real world. Egypt's dry climate is actually great for preserving things. Tombs stay sealed for thousands of years. Textiles, wood, even bread can survive if they're buried deep enough. But nothing from a lost builder has turned up at Giza. The ground has been dug, sometimes too much, and still no sign. There's also the question of technology. Building the Sphinx takes more than just muscle. You need a plan for carving, ways to move stone, and systems to feed and house workers. The scale of the project matches what we see during the Pyramid Age. Those pharaohs had armies of builders, scribes, and craftsmen. They left records of their work and even graffiti from the workers themselves. If a much older group did the same thing, where's their mark? Where's their camp, their food storage, their quarries? Archaeologists look for these things, and they're simply not there. Let's zoom out a bit. Archaeology is all about layers. What's on top is younger, what's deeper is older. This is called stratigraphy, and it's one of the main ways archaeologists figure out timelines. At Giza, the deeper layers still match the Old Kingdom. If the Sphinx was truly ancient, dug out before the pyramids, the dirt and debris around it should tell that story. Maybe older pottery, older tools, or a different kind of burial. But the layers all say pharaohs, no hidden civilization, no secret technology. Here's another thing. When archaeologists dig up a lost city or a forgotten temple, they find signs of change. Sometimes the art style shifts. Sometimes the way people bury their dead changes. Sometimes the houses look different or new gods appear. These are the fingerprints of a new people moving in, or a culture evolving over time. But at Giza, the fingerprints never change. It's Old Kingdom, all the way down. Let's try a thought experiment. Imagine a team building the Sphinx 10,000 years ago, during a time of rain and green valleys. They finish the statue, clean up, and leave. Then, for thousands of years, nobody does anything. No one carves a single mark, builds a hut, or leaves a broken cup. Then, suddenly, the pharaohs arrive and build their pyramids right next door. It doesn't fit how people act. Humans leave traces, even nomads drop things, even short-lived cultures make their mark. And here's what gets me. In every other place on Earth where humans built something big, there's a trail. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is old, maybe 11,000 years. But even there you find clues. Animal bones, carvings, fire pits, and broken tools. In Mesopotamia, the first cities left piles of pottery, walls, and even trash mounds. In the Americas, the oldest temples come with storage pits and burial grounds. But at Giza, for this lost group, there's nothing, just a giant statue and silence. Let's talk about how archaeologists use context. Context means what's around a find. If you discover a coin, it matters where you found it. Was it in a temple, a trash heap, a grave? The same object means different things in different places. With the Sphinx, context is missing for an older date. The area was dug and cleared during the time of the pyramids. Everything we find fits that story. There's no sign the statue was already ancient when the pyramids went up. No layer of older debris, no earlier burial ground, no strange tools. Some people say maybe we just haven't found the evidence yet. Maybe it's still buried waiting for a lucky dig. Archaeologists reply, maybe, but after all these years it's strange not even a hint has turned up. Sometimes the absence of evidence really does mean something is missing. Another angle is the written record from outside Egypt. If a lost civilization built the Sphinx, you'd expect neighbours to mention it. People travelled, traded, and told stories, but there are no old myths, no foreign records, no travellers' tales about a strange lion statue in the desert before the pharaohs. The first stories come from Egypt itself, and they treat the Sphinx as part of their own world. And here's a subtle point. Archaeology isn't just about finding things, it's about fitting the pieces together. The Sphinx fits the Old Kingdom like a puzzle piece. Its style, size and location make sense when you look at what the pharaohs built and how they ruled. If you pull it out of that context, you're left with a giant question mark. It floats, with nothing to anchor it in time. Let's not forget bias. Archaeologists are human. They get attached to their theories. Sometimes they miss things or explain them away. But the rain theory asks for a huge leap. It doesn't just move a date. It invents a lost world, then asks us to believe in it with no proof. That's a big ask. Most experts want solid evidence, something you can hold, measure, or dig up. There's also the danger of magical thinking. History is full of stories about lost worlds and ancient wisdom. People want to believe in Atlantis, in secret knowledge, in ancient builders with powers we lost. But archaeology tries to keep both feet on the ground. If you say there was a lost civilization here, you need proof. Not just a big statue, but the messy leftovers of daily life. Now let's look at the limits of archaeology. Sometimes things really do vanish. Whole cities can be buried by sand, wiped out by flood, or burned to ash. But even then, traces survive. Layers of ash from fires, bones, seeds, or the scattered remains of meals. In Egypt, the dry air keeps things better than almost anywhere else. That's why we have mummies, papyrus records, and even food from ancient tombs. If a civilization lived here, built something huge, and then disappeared, you'd expect at least a few leftovers. The rain. Theory, at its heart, is an argument from absence. It says, the stone looks too old, therefore something must be missing. But archaeology says, if something big is missing, we should see other clues. That's the tug of war, rock versus ruins, erosion versus context. Let's consider what it would take to change most experts' minds. If tomorrow a researcher found a tomb under the Sphinx filled with tools and carvings unlike anything known from Egypt's Old Kingdom, the debate would explode. If a new layer of settlement with different pottery or bones turned up beneath the sand, the timeline would have to change. Archaeologists are cautious but not closed-minded. It's just that so far, every shovel of dirt says pharaohs, not lost builders. There's a final reason archaeology pushes back against the rain theory. It's about how we build stories from the past. It's tempting to focus on the wildest, most mysterious idea, but sometimes the real answer is simple and boring. People don't like boring, but boring is often true. Archaeologists try to keep the story grounded in what they can prove, not what they wish was true. Still, mysteries are part of the fun. The Sphinx stands at the edge of what we know and what we imagine. Archaeology can't answer every question. Sometimes all we have is a giant riddle waiting in the sand. But until the dirt gives up its secrets, the official story holds. And yet, even as we dig and debate, there's something about the Sphinx that feels unfinished. Something that refuses to fit. Maybe that's why people keep looking for new answers. Now look up to the one part of the statue that breaks the pattern. Now let's talk about the part of the Sphinx that grabs everyone's attention, even when they don't know why. The head. It sits on top, smaller than you'd expect, staring out over the sand. For some people, the face is the most familiar thing in the world. For others, it's a mask, hiding secrets. But for anyone who's studied this mystery, the head is a puzzle all by itself. Let's start with the numbers because they're hard to argue with. The whole statue is about 240 feet long. The head, from chin to crown, is only about 30 feet tall. That sounds big until you realise the body is 8 times longer than the head is high. If you look at it from a distance, the head seems almost too small for the rest of the statue. It's like someone swapped it out with a shrunken version. Kids notice this right away. Adults too, once you point it out. So why is the head so small? Was it always like this? Or did something happen along the way? Here's where the trouble begins. If the Sphinx was carved all at once, the head should match the body. Ancient Egyptian art usually gets the proportions right, especially for something this important. Their other statues, even the biggest ones, keep the heads and bodies in balance. You see this with the pharaoh's statues, massive, but the heads are always the right size. But this one is different. The head looks almost squished. It doesn't match the bulk of the lion's body. That's the first clue. Now, let's look at the way the stone weathers. The body shows deep, rounded grooves. Some people say these look like they were made by rain over a long wet period. The paws and chest are rough, pitted, and in some places almost melted away. But the head is pretty smooth. The details are clearer. You can still make out the outline of the headdress and some of the features, even after all these years. That's strange. The head should be just as battered as the body, if not more. It sticks up higher, facing the wind and sand. But it isn't. It looks like it's been touched up, or maybe even recarved. Geologists have looked at this and noticed something else. The limestone that makes up the body is softer, with layers that crumble easily, but the stone in the head is harder. It's a better type of limestone, less likely to wear down. This could explain why the head is in better shape, but it doesn't explain the size problem. So, what's going on here? Some experts think the answer is simple. The head was changed. Maybe it was recut at some point in history. Maybe the original face was something else, and later pharaohs carved their own image over the top. Let's break down the theories. The first idea is that the Sphinx started as a lion. The body is shaped like a crouching cat, broad chest, strong paws, long tail. Some people think the head was also a lion, with a mane matching the body in size. Over time, as the stone weathered, the face wore away the fastest. Later rulers, wanting to put their own mark on the monument, chiselled a new head out of what was left. But here's the catch. The more you carve, the smaller the head gets. You can only cut away stone, not add it back. So, if the original head was big and lion-shaped, and someone wanted to make it into a human face, they'd have to chip away at the old features. With each new version, the head shrinks a little more. That could explain why it looks undersized today. There's some support for this theory. Art historians point out that the style of the face doesn't quite match what you'd expect from the earliest dynasties. Some details look more like later periods. The headdress, called a nemes, is the kind you see on pharaohs, but the shape is off. It's wider at the top than usual. The ears are set differently from other statues of the same age. There are also stories from ancient times that the Sphinx was restored more than once. Pharaohs loved to fix up old monuments. They'd carve their names on them, repair broken parts, or even change the face to look more like themselves. There's an old dream stele, a stone marker, placed between the Sphinx's paws by a pharaoh named Thutmose IV. It says he cleared away sand and made repairs after the statue was already ancient. But it doesn't say exactly what he changed. Some people take this even further. They wonder if the original statue wasn't a lion at all, but something even older. Maybe a different animal. Maybe a face nobody remembers now. Over time, as rulers came and went, The head was changed, covered up and recarved until only the current version remained. But there's another problem. If the head was changed so much, you'd expect to find marks from the old face. Maybe lines hidden under the surface, or traces of a mane. Archaeologists have looked with modern tools, scanners, X-rays, even 3D models. So far, they haven't found clear signs of an earlier face under the current one. That doesn't mean it's impossible, but it makes the theory harder to prove. Let's go back to the stone. Remember, the head is made of harder limestone. Some people think this was no accident. Maybe the builders picked this spot because the upper layer was tougher. That would help the face survive longer, even in harsh weather. But if that's true, why is the body so much more damaged? The answer might be simple geology. The softer layers were easier to carve but also more likely to erode. The hard cap protected the head, at least for a while. Now, here's something that doesn't get enough attention. The nose and beard are missing. Everyone notices the nose, of course. It's been gone for centuries. Some say Napoleon's soldiers shot it off. Others blame ancient vandals or even early tourists. But there's no clear proof for any of these stories. Old drawings from the 1700s show the nose already missing. There's no record of who did it or when. The beard is another story. In the 1800s, British archaeologists found pieces of a stone beard buried in the sand nearby. It was broken, but matched the style of pharaohs. Those pieces are now in museums in London and Cairo. No one is sure if the beard was part of the original statue or added later. If it was added, that's more evidence the statue was changed and repaired over time. All of this leads to a bigger question. Why would anyone go to the trouble of changing the face of such a huge monument? The answer, as usual, is about power. Pharaohs wanted to show they ruled not just the living but the past as well. By putting their own face on an ancient statue, they tied themselves to history. It was a way of saying, I am as eternal as this stone. Sometimes that meant erasing what came before. This kind of thing happened all over Egypt. New rulers would chisel out old names and carve their own. They'd change statues to look more like themselves. It wasn't just about vanity, it was about control. If you could claim something old and mysterious, you gained some of its magic. But here's where things get tricky. If the head was changed, when did it happen? And more importantly, what did it look like before? Some researchers think the weathering patterns offer a clue. The head is in better shape, less worn than the body. If both had been exposed for the same amount of time, they should match. But maybe the original head was so badly damaged that later workers had to recarve it completely, using the tougher stone that was left. There's also the shape of the neck to consider. If you look closely, the head seems almost perched on the body, rather than growing out of it naturally. Some sculptors have pointed out that this is odd. On other statues, the head and body flow together. Here it's like a new piece was stuck on top, even though it's carved from the same rock. Another angle comes from old photographs and maps. In the 1800s, before modern digging, the statue was buried up to its shoulders in sand. Only the head stuck out. Early explorers drew what they saw, sometimes adding details from their own imagination. But once the sand was cleared away, people noticed how strange the proportions were. The head was too small, too smooth, too different from the battered body. Now, let's talk about the face itself. Some people say it looks African, others see a different ethnicity. Some think it matches the face of Pharaoh Khafre, who built the second pyramid. There's a broken statue of Khafre found nearby. When you compare its features to the Sphinx, the lips and chin look similar, but the match isn't perfect. Artists in ancient Egypt didn't always make a statue look like the real person. Sometimes they used a royal style that flattened out the details. There's another theory that the face was meant to be someone else entirely. Maybe a female ruler, like Hatshepsut. Or maybe it started as a lioness, and the face was changed to a man later. There's no clear proof for any of these ideas, but they keep coming up because the face refuses to fit neatly into any box. Some scientists have even tried facial reconstruction, like what police do with old skulls. They use 3D scans to rebuild what the original face might have looked like. The results are always different. Some look like the classic pharaohs. Others seem more animal-like, with a broader face and wider nose. No one can agree. Let's zoom out for a second. The mystery of the head isn't just about art or stonework, it's about identity. Who gets to claim the past? Who decides what the face of history looks like? When you stand in front of the Sphinx, you're not just looking at a statue. You're staring at thousands of years of arguments, repairs, and ideas layered on top of each other. Even today, the face is at the centre of debates. Some groups see it as proof of their own heritage. Others point to the mixed features as a sign of Egypt's long, tangled history. Every visitor brings their own story to the stone. And here's what gets me. The head is the one part that everyone remembers, but also the part that feels least certain. The body is a lion, that much is clear. But the face is a question. Was it always a man? Was it always that small? Did it once roar instead of stare? Let's not forget the repairs. Over the years, workers have patched cracks, filled holes and covered damage with new stone. Sometimes they made things better. Other times they left scars. The Sphinx is a survivor, but it's also a patchwork. There's a lesson here about history. The stories we tell change as the evidence changes. The more we fix, the more we cover up. The more we study, the more questions appear. Geologists, archaeologists, artists. They all see something different when they look at the head. Some see proof of a lost age. Others see the work of later kings, hungry for glory. Some see an accident of geology, a lucky patch of hard stone that lasted while the rest faded away. And in the end, the head is a symbol of the whole debate. It's the place where old theories and new ideas crash together. It's too small, too smooth, too strange to sit quietly at the top of such a powerful monument. People wonder if the answer is hidden under the stone. Maybe someday new technology will peel back the layers, revealing what was there before. Maybe a single discovery, a hidden inscription, a buried piece of the original face, will shift the story again. But for now, the head remains a puzzle, staring out over the desert, daring us to guess its secrets, refusing to fit any single story. And some people hope that the real answer, the one that explains everything, is waiting in the bedrock just below the surface. Maybe all it takes is one more careful look. Maybe the next great discovery is just beneath the stone, waiting for someone to find it. So let's get below the surface. The Sphinx sits in a pit cut deep into the Giza bedrock. Most people look at the statue itself, but for this mystery, what's underneath matters even more. The ground around the monument isn't just a floor, it's a record. It holds clues to how the statue was made, what's happened to it, and maybe even how old it really is. Start with the bedrock. If you stand at the pause and look back, you'll see the ground drops away into a shallow trench. The body was carved right out of this rock. The builders didn't drag huge blocks from somewhere else. They simply cut down, shaping the statue from what was already there. This means every layer, every crack, every colour change in the rock matters. The Sphinx isn't just sitting on the Giza plateau, it's part of it. This is where the rain debate gets real. The sides of the pit show deep, rounded grooves. They look different from the sharp, chiselled lines you see on other ancient structures nearby. Some people say these curves are from water running down the walls, eroding the stone in slow, steady waves. Others think they're from sand and wind, or even from workers hacking away with their tools. But here's what's interesting. Scientists have compared these grooves to other places in Egypt. When limestone gets hit with heavy rain, it develops soft U-shaped channels. When sand and wind do the work, the marks are usually sharper, more V-shaped, almost like scratches. On the Sphinx's enclosure walls, the grooves are mostly rounded. That's odd in a desert where water is rare and wind is strong. Let's talk about layers for a second. The rock under the statue isn't all the same. The top layer is tough and dense. It doesn't wear away easily. Lower layers get softer, almost crumbly. You can see this in the pit walls. Hard stone above, softer, yellower rock below. When rainwater hits, it eats away at the soft layers first, leaving ledges and shelves. Visitors to the site see these bands like stripes on a cake cut into the rock. Now, if you look at nearby tombs and temples, most are made from blocks cut out of this same bedrock. But they don't show the same kind of weathering. Their surfaces are smoother or marked by straight tool cuts. Rain didn't shape those in the same way. This makes the Sphinx pit unique. Some geologists have run experiments. They've sprayed water onto limestone blocks to see what happens over months and years. The results are always the same. Water leaves soft, rounded grooves. Wind and sand leave pitting and sharp cuts. So when they look at the Sphinx pit and see those rounds, they think water had to be involved. But when? Because there's barely any rain in Giza today. Less than an inch each year. Not enough to do this kind of work. And here's another detail. The lowest parts of the enclosure, closest to the pores, are worn down the most. The grooves there are deep, sometimes several inches. As you move up, the stone gets harder and the grooves fade. If this was all from workers, you'd expect things to be even. But water acts differently. It pools and flows in low spots, carving deeper as it drains away. Some researchers have mapped out the pit in detail. They've taken hundreds of measurements, making 3D models of every crack and curve. They found that the deepest erosion lines up with the places rainwater would have collected and run off. Think about a sidewalk after a storm. Water always finds the lowest point. It's the same here, but on a much bigger scale. And yet, not everyone agrees. Some Egyptologists argue that the grooves are from something else entirely. Maybe ancient workers hacked rough steps into the walls to reach higher up, then never smoothed them out. Maybe they used wooden scaffolds that scraped against the rock, or maybe later people dug out the sand and left the walls exposed to the wind for centuries. But here's the thing. Most other ancient statues in Egypt don't sit in deep pits. They stand out in the open, or at least on flat ground. So if wind and sand alone made these shapes, you'd expect to see them elsewhere. But you don't. That makes the Sphinx enclosure different. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about what's inside the rock. Geologists have drilled small cores from the site, pulling out thin tubes of stone. When they look at these under a microscope, they can see tiny fossils, grains of sand and layers of minerals. Some layers are packed tight, others are loose and crumbly. The softer layers match up with the deepest grooves in the pit. Harder layers stick out, almost like ledges. Water moves through rock in a certain way. It soaks into cracks, carries away tiny pieces, and leaves behind minerals as it dries. Over years, this can hollow out big channels. Sand and wind don't work the same way. They sandblast the surface but don't dig deep into the stone. Now, let's talk about something weird that's been found under the pores. In the late 1970s, a team using radar found a few small hollow spaces under the front part of the statue. These aren't huge chambers, maybe just gaps or old tunnels. Some think they're natural, formed as water moved through the rock. Others think they could be old construction shafts, dug by workers to help shape the pores or repair the statue later. Either way, they show that the limestone under the Sphinx isn't solid all the way through. But what about the floor of the pit? Some people believe there are even more secrets buried there, Over the years, sand has filled in the bottom, sometimes covering the pores completely. Every time the sand is cleared away, new cracks and grooves appear. Some of these are from rain, others from shifting ground, and some maybe from earthquakes. In the 1990s, a team used ground-penetrating radar to scan below the floor. They were looking for hidden rooms or tunnels, maybe even a lost library. What they found instead were more pockets and weak zones in the stone. No secret chambers, but clear signs that water once moved through these layers, hollowing out spaces as it went. So what does this all mean? If rain shaped the Sphinx pit, it must have happened when the climate was very different. The last time Giza saw heavy regular rain was between 9,000 and 5,000 years ago. That's way before most experts say the monument was carved. If the statue is older than we thought, that changes everything we know about ancient Egypt. But there's more. The bottom of the pit is lower than the base of the nearby pyramids. When it rains hard, water collects here first. Even today, after a rare storm, you can see puddles form at the pores. Over time, water sitting at the bottom would eat away at the stone, deepening the grooves. The damage is always worst where water stands the longest. Another thing to notice is the pattern of the grooves. They run mostly up and down, like rain streaming off a roof. If sand and wind were the main cause, you'd expect more horizontal marks, since the wind mostly blows from the west. But the marks don't match the wind's path. And here's a twist. There are ancient quarries nearby, dug out of the same kind of rock. The walls there have sharp tool marks and some wind-blasted surfaces, but none of them show deep, rounded grooves like the Sphinx's pit. This suggests something different happened here. Some experts have tried to date the weathering itself. They look at how much rock is missing, then use chemistry to estimate how long that would take. It's not a perfect science. There are lots of guesses involved, but the numbers often point to a much older date than the history books say, sometimes by thousands of years. Let's talk about the big blocks stacked along the pit walls. These are known as repair stones. Over the centuries, parts of the rock crumbled away. Workers patched the worst spots with big limestone blocks. Some are ancient, placed there maybe 3,000 years ago. Others are much newer, from repairs done in the last 100 years. The original stone behind these repairs is often much more worn down, almost eaten away. If you peel back the repairs, the old grooves are even deeper. It's like seeing the scars of every storm, every flood, every year of weather. The repairs hide the damage, but they don't erase it. So, what's the argument against all this? Some Egyptologists say that the statue sat buried in sand for most of its life. Sand, they argue, protected the rock from rain, wind, and sun. That would slow down weathering. But the rain damage goes deep, deeper than simple surface wear. For that to happen, the rock had to be exposed for a long time, with water running over it again and again. There are also signs that the pit flooded in ancient times. Some ancient graffiti, scratched onto the walls, is now several feet below the modern ground level. That means people stood down there when the pit was deeper and drier. Later, more sand filled it in, but the marks stayed. Some of these carvings are so old, nobody can read what they say anymore. Another detail. The pit isn't flat. It slopes down toward the statue's back. That's where rainwater would naturally drain, carving out the deepest grooves. This matches what scientists see in places with heavy rainfall today. The lowest points always show the worst damage. Let's not forget about earthquakes. Egypt isn't known for huge quakes, but small tremors do happen. Over time, shaking can crack stone, letting water get in and do even more damage. Some of the biggest cracks in the enclosure walls line up with fault lines underground. It's another way the rock under the statue keeps changing. And here's a thought that comes up a lot. If the statue really is much older than we think, there should be more evidence, tools, pottery, human bones. But so far, most of what's been found in the pit is from later times. That doesn't mean an earlier date is impossible. Maybe the builders left little behind, or maybe it's all buried deeper than anyone has dug. Every time archaeologists dig a little deeper, they find new surprises. Sometimes it's a piece of pottery. Sometimes it's a tool made from a type of stone that doesn't match the Giza plateau. Sometimes it's nothing at all, just more sand and rock. Some people have even tried digging below the pores, hoping to find a hidden chamber. In the 1920s, a French engineer drilled a shaft and found only more limestone. No treasure, no secret room. Just a record of water moving through the stone, leaving behind stains and soft spots. So, just under the statue, the story is written in rock. Every groove, every crack, every change in colour tells part of the tale. The evidence points to water, lots of it, shaping the pit long before the desert took over. But the full story is still buried. Maybe the real answer is under a layer of sand no one's touched yet. This is what keeps the argument alive. Some experts see proof of ancient rain. Others see only the marks of time and repair. The ground under the statue holds more questions than answers. Every new scan, every new dig brings another clue and another puzzle. What's underneath isn't just stone. It's a record of every storm, every flood, every repair, every mystery the statue has survived. The argument about rain and age doesn't just sit on the surface. It runs deep, all the way to the bedrock. And that's why, even after years of digging, measuring and arguing, the question never really goes away. There's always something left to find, hidden just beneath our feet. So here's where things really get interesting. After all the digging, scanning and arguing, why is there still no clear answer about the Sphinx and its rain-shaped scars? Why does the debate keep looping around, never really ending? Let's break down the shape of the whole argument. What's actually being fought over, how each side builds its case, and where things get tangled up. Start with the basics. Think of this debate like a tug of war. On one side, you've got geologists. They look at rocks, weather, and the marks left behind. For them, those rounded channels, those deep, smooth grooves, these are all classic signs of water, not desert wind. They point to the patterns you see after steady rain on soft stone. It's like what you'd find in places that get drenched for months, not a place that's dry almost all year. On the other side, you have Egyptologists. Their world isn't just rocks, it's kings, tombs, old stories, and everything people left behind. They care about what's been written down, what's been found in the ground, and how all the pieces fit together. For them, history is a timeline, one that's already crowded with names and dates. If you move the Sphinx back by thousands of years, their whole story gets scrambled. So they're careful, maybe even stubborn, about changing the dates. Both sides use evidence, but they value different things. Geologists trust what the rock says. Egyptologists trust what the history says. This clash makes it hard to agree, even when everyone's looking at the same grooves in the same stone. Let's dig a little deeper into how each side builds their case. Imagine a courtroom, but the jury is the rest of the world. The geologists come in first, laying out their photos of the grooves. They bring in samples from other places, caves, canyons, even old ruins that have seen heavy rain. They show how water shapes stone differently than wind or tools. They point to the deep channels near the pores, the way the marks run up and down the rounded shelves. All these, they say, mean one thing: water, and lots of it, over a long time. To back this up, they might show pictures of places that get rain today. you see the same rounded shapes. They'll talk about how limestone reacts to water, how softer layers get eaten away first. They might even bring up experiments where they sprayed water on stone for months, watching as it softened and wore down. The patterns match what you see at the statue's base. But then the Egyptologists take the floor. They start with the records. For them, the Sphinx fits into a story that's already packed. They have lists of kings, carvings, temple ruins, and all the things found in the sand. According to them, the statue was built during the reign of a pharaoh named Khafre, about 4,500 years ago. That's what the old books and wall carvings say. That's when the rest of the monuments around it were built. If you move the statue's age back by thousands of years, you're saying there was a lost civilization before Egypt as we know it. That's a huge claim, and they want a lot more proof than just weathered rock. Egyptologists also bring up the lack of older tools, pottery, or human remains. If the Sphinx was built much earlier, where are the things people would have left behind? Why have none of the deep digs turned up older stuff? For them, the absence of evidence is a big deal. So you've got two groups, both looking at the same statue, but almost speaking different languages. One says the rock tells the story. The other says the history tells the story. That's why they end up talking past each other, not with each other. Now let's look at how arguments get tangled. The rain theory sounds simple at first. Water made the grooves, so the statue must be older than Egypt. But it's not that easy. The climate in Giza has changed a lot over time. There were wetter periods, it's true. But figuring out exactly when and how much rain fell is tricky. Some scientists say the last time there was enough rain to carve those grooves was between 9,000 and 5,000 years ago. Others argue that a few heavy storms spread out over centuries could do a lot of damage even in a mostly dry place. Plus, the pit around the statue is deep. It's possible that water pooled there, even after the climate turned dry. Maybe rare floods did the work, not steady rain. Or maybe people dug the pit deeper over time, exposing softer layers and letting water cause more damage. There's no single answer that covers every detail, and then there's the problem of repairs. Over the years, people have patched up the statue many times. Blocks were added, the body was rebuilt, and sand was cleared out again and again. Every repair changes the surface. Some of the old grooves are now hidden behind new stone. Others have been worn smooth by later work. This makes it hard to read the story in the rock, because parts are missing or changed. Let's not forget about the head. Its size and style raise more questions. Some say the head was recarved from something older, maybe even a lion or another figure. If that's true, it means the statue has changed a lot since it was first shaped. This could hide older weathering or damage, making the whole dating game even harder. Now, add in the tools. The kinds of chisels and hammers used to carve limestone have changed a lot over time. Ancient workers used copper, then bronze, then iron. If the statue was really built before Egypt's first pharaohs, what tools did they use? Copper is soft and wears down quickly. Carving a statue this big out of bedrock would take an army of workers and a mountain of broken tools. You'd expect to find at least some of these left behind, but almost nothing has turned up from a much earlier time. Another twist. The missing nose and beard. People often wonder if these were broken off by accident or by people who wanted to erase the statue's face. But the way the breaks happened shows that the stone was already weathered and cracked. That means the statue had already been out in the elements for a long time before anything was knocked off. How long is a long time? That's just another piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about the bigger picture for a moment. The story of the statue isn't just about rain or kings. It's about how we build arguments and what we believe about the past. Every time someone comes up with a new theory, the other side finds holes in it. One person says, "Look at the weathering." The other says, Where's the proof of older people? Back and forth, year after year. Some people try to play peacemaker. They suggest maybe both sides are right in a way. Maybe the statue was started in an earlier time, as a rough shape, maybe even as a lion. Then, later workers came along and reshaped it into the face we know today. That could explain the strange head, the deep grooves, and the lack of older tools or pottery. It's a theory that tries to find a middle ground, but it's still just a guess. And then, there's the problem of lost records. In ancient times, people wrote on papyrus, which rots in the damp, or on stone, which lasts but is rare. Most of the old stories, building records and names are gone forever, so we're left with a few scraps. This means giant gaps in the story, missing years, missing rulers, missing reasons for why things were built the way they were. People fill those gaps with guesses, but those guesses are coloured by what each side values most. Let's try to see this from outside the argument for a moment. Why does it matter so much? Part of it is pride. Changing the age of the statue would mean admitting a huge mistake in our picture of the past. It would mean rewriting the story of one of the world's most famous places. That's not easy to do. People stake their careers on what they believe. Nobody wants to be the one who got it wrong. But it's also about mystery. The statue stands at the edge of what we know and what we don't. It's old enough that nobody alive remembers when it was made. Old enough that the first written records already call it ancient. That's rare. Most monuments have a clear place in history. This one floats in a kind of fog. Now let's talk about how the argument changes over time. In the 1800s, most people thought the statue was just another pharaoh's project. In the late 1900s, new science like seismology and weather studies opened up the question again. Each new tool brings new ideas, but also new doubts. Every time it seems like things are settled, someone finds another clue, and the debate starts up all over again. There's also the problem of proving a negative. If you say, there was never a lost civilization before Egypt, you can't prove that for sure. Maybe the proof is buried too deep to find. Maybe it was destroyed by time or by later builders. If you say there was a lost civilization, you need to find something, tools, bones, writing, that's clearly older than anything we know. So far, nobody has found the smoking gun. This leaves us with a kind of stalemate. Both sides have good points, both have weak spots. The rock shows signs of water, but the history shows no people before Egypt. The repairs hide some clues, but reveal others. The climate was wetter once, but how wet and when? We just don't know for sure. And here's where my mind goes sometimes. Maybe the real value of the argument isn't in finding a final answer. Maybe it's in the way it keeps us digging, keeps us curious. The statue stands as a reminder that the past is always more complicated than we think. There are always more layers, more questions, more reasons to look closer. Think about all the things we can't see. Under the sand there might be more ruins, more clues, more surprises waiting. Every time someone brushes away a little more dust, the story changes. Maybe someday, someone will find a piece of pottery or an old tool that breaks the tie for good. Or maybe not. Maybe the mystery is what keeps the statue alive in our minds. There's also something comforting in the idea that not everything can be solved. That some things are just beyond our reach for now. It means there's always something left to learn. Always another reason to wonder. So, the shape of the argument is this. People see the same evidence but read it differently. Geologists trust the silent story told by stone. Egyptologists trust the timeline built by people and things. Each side pushes back, when the other side gets too close to changing the story. In the middle sits the statue itself, a silent judge that doesn't give up its secrets easily. Every groove, every crack, every patch of new stone is a clue, but none of them are the answer. The sand keeps shifting. The debate keeps going, and that, in a way, is what makes this mystery so powerful. It's not just about old rocks or forgotten kings. It's about the way we try to know things, and the way some things always slip through our fingers. The statue has survived everything. Storms, floods, wars, and even our questions. Maybe part of its magic is that it still refuses to explain itself. So whichever answer is right, rain, wind, or something else, the truth is remarkable. The argument isn't just about the past, it's about how we search for meaning, even when the answers stay just out of reach. So here's the real question. Why does any of this matter? Why do people care so much about how old a giant stone statue is, or what carved its cracks? After all, it's just a pile of rock in the desert, right? But the truth is, this debate isn't just about one old monument. It's about how we think about history, what counts as proof, and even how we see ourselves in the world. The rain debate is really a test of how far we're willing to go to question what we think we know. Let's start with the basics. If the statue really is older than the pyramids and pharaohs, then our whole timeline of who did what and when in Egypt gets flipped upside down. That would mean people were building huge things that lasted for thousands of years, way before we thought they could. It would mean there's a missing chapter in human history, and that's a big deal. Think about it. Almost every school book in the world would have to change. But it's more than just rewriting a few dates. If the statue is older, then it hints at a lost group of people, a culture we know nothing about. No names, no written stories, no clear reason for why they built such a thing. That's like finding a message in a bottle, but the rest of the letter is missing. All you have is a piece of something much bigger. It's both exciting and frustrating. It makes you wonder, what else have we missed? And there's another layer. If water shaped those grooves, it means the weather in Egypt was totally different at some point. The desert we see today was once green, rainy, maybe even full of animals and plants. That changes how we picture ancient life. It means people living there had a different world. Imagine lions, hippos, and lush grass instead of endless sand. That's not just a footnote. It's a whole new story about where people lived, how they survived, and why they built what they did. Here's something else to think about. This statue isn't just any monument. It's a symbol that shows up everywhere. In movies, cartoons, on coins and stamps. It's a face that millions of people know, even if they've never left their hometown. If it turns out to be older than we thought, that changes how we see all of ancient Egypt. Suddenly, the history we thought was solid becomes full of holes. The familiar becomes strange. That's both scary and thrilling. Now, let's zoom out even more. This debate shows us how science and history work. It's a living example of how people argue about what's real. On one side, you have the rock experts, measuring grooves, testing stone, running computer models. On the other, you have the history detectives, following trails of broken pots, faded carvings, and old stories. Both are using real skills and real evidence, but they don't always agree on what counts as enough proof. This is where things get interesting. Most of the time, we like to think facts are facts. But here, two groups of experts look at the same thing and come away with different answers. That's a reminder that knowledge isn't always simple. Sometimes what you find depends on what you're looking for, or what you believe is even possible. Let's look at what happens if the rain theory is right. Suddenly, Egypt isn't the world's first big civilization. There's something older hiding in the shadows, maybe not just in Egypt, but in other places too. It would force everyone to start searching for clues in new places, maybe under the sand, maybe under the sea. People might ask, what else have we missed? It would open the door to all kinds of new questions about lost cultures, forgotten inventions, and vanished languages. But even if the rain theory isn't right, the whole argument still matters. Why? Because it shows us how hard it is to be sure about the past. Stones can be worn down by water, wind, people, even pollution. Stories get lost, records rot away. Sometimes, all we have is a guess, based on the best clues we can find, and that's okay. It means we're always learning, always updating what we think we know. There's a deeper lesson here too. History isn't just a list of dates and names, it's a story we tell about ourselves, where we came from, what we're capable of, what matters most. When something big like this comes along, it makes us pause. It reminds us that our story isn't finished. There are still mysteries, still surprises waiting in the sand. Now, let's talk about pride for a second. For some experts, changing the date of the statue would mean admitting they were wrong. That's hard. People spend their lives studying this stuff. They write books, teach classes, give talks. Nobody wants to throw away years of work. But science and history only move forward when people are willing to let go of old ideas. That's why debates like this are healthy, even if they're messy. There's also a kind of hope in all this. Every time someone finds a new clue, a broken tool, a bit of writing, a sample of old pollen, it's a chance to learn more. The statue stands as a challenge. It says, "Figure me out if you can." That's part of why people keep coming back to the question year after year. The mystery pulls us in. Let's not forget how much ancient monuments shape our sense of wonder. The statue is huge. It's survived longer than most countries, longer than most languages. It's been through storms, invasions, earthquakes, and still it sits, looking out over the desert. Some people see it as a guardian, others as a riddle. Either way, it's a reminder that people have always wanted to leave their mark. They wanted to build something that would last, something that would outlive them. Think about how rare that is. Most things people make break down, get lost, or are forgotten. But this statue has lasted through every kind of change. That's a message all by itself. It says you're part of something bigger. That's comforting in a strange way. Here's another angle. The rain debate isn't just about Egypt. It's about how we deal with the unknown in general. Every field, science, history, even art, runs into mysteries that won't go away. Sometimes we solve them. Sometimes we just learn to live with them. In a world full of answers, it's good to remember there are still questions. It keeps us humble. A lot of people are drawn to this mystery because it hints at lost knowledge. Maybe there were skills or ideas that vanished long ago. Maybe ancient people knew things we've forgotten. That's a fun thought. It makes us wonder what we could still learn if we keep digging, both in the sand and in old stories. And think about how technology changes the game. 50 years ago, nobody could scan rocks with lasers or test tiny bits of dust for ancient pollen. Today, scientists can do things that would have sounded like magic 100 years ago. Every new tool is a chance to see the statue in a new way. It's a reminder that mysteries aren't always forever. Sometimes, the right question just needs the right tool. But there's a flip side. Even with all our gadgets, some answers stay just out of reach. Maybe that's the point. Maybe not knowing everything is part of what makes history special. If we solved every puzzle, there would be nothing left to chase. The statue also matters because it shows how the past shapes the present. People travel from all over the world to see it. They take photos, draw pictures, write stories. It inspires art, music, even jokes. It's part of our shared story as humans. If its history changed, our story would change too. There's something universal about trying to figure out a mystery like this. Every culture has its riddles, its legends, its lost stories. The statue is just one of many, but it's a big one. It stands for all the puzzles we haven't solved yet. It says, keep looking, keep asking. That's a good lesson for anyone. Now, let's get a little philosophical for a moment. Why do we care so much about the truth? Why not just enjoy the legend? Part of it is curiosity. Humans want to know. We want to put things in order, draw lines from A to B, explain the world. The statue fights back against that urge. It says, some things are bigger than your answers. That's both a challenge and a comfort. The rain debate also shows how different kinds of knowledge work together, or don't. Science is about testing, measuring, checking results. History is about stories, context, meaning. Both are important, but they don't always fit neatly together. That's why arguments like this last so long. Each side has its own kind of truth. Let's look at it another way. If the statue is older than we think, it means people in the distant past were smarter and more skilled than we gave them credit for. That's inspiring. It means creativity, teamwork, and problem solving have always been part of being human. Even when records are lost, the results survive. And if the statue isn't older, if the rain marks have another explanation, that's okay too. It means our methods are working. It means the timeline we use to teach kids, build museums, and understand ourselves still holds up. That's comforting in a different way. No matter which answer turns out to be true, we win something. If the statue is ancient beyond belief, we get to rewrite our story and add a new chapter. If it's not, we get to trust the hard work of thousands of experts over hundreds of years. Both outcomes teach us something about curiosity, patience, and the value of asking good questions. There's also a lesson about doubt. Most of the time, we want clear answers. But sometimes we have to live with not knowing. That's tough. But it's also honest. The statue reminds us that some questions don't have easy answers, and that's okay. Think about all the things in your own life that you'll never fully understand. The statue is like that, but on a giant scale. It stands there, year after year, asking questions without saying a word. People sometimes ask if mysteries like this are a waste of time. Why not just move on? But here's the thing. Mystery pulls us forward. It keeps us searching. It's the reason people climb mountains, explore space, or study old bones. Not knowing is what makes life interesting. And sometimes, new discoveries happen because someone refused to let go of a mystery. Maybe a kid with a toy shovel finds a new clue in the sand. Maybe a scientist with a new tool spots something everyone else missed. That's how knowledge grows, one question at a time. So the debate about the statue's rain scars is really about something bigger. It's about what kind of people we want to be. Do we accept old answers just because they're comfortable? Or do we keep asking, even when it's hard? The statue sits there, silent but strong, daring us to look closer. I think about this sometimes. The statue has seen more change than any living thing. It's watched empires rise and fall, languages change, people come and go. It's outlasted every argument about its age. In that way, it's a reminder that some things truly are bigger than us. The real power of this debate is in what it teaches us about wonder, doubt, and the drive to know. Whether the answer is rain, wind, or something we haven't even thought of yet, the statue gives us a reason to keep looking. It's a puzzle with no easy fix, and maybe that's what makes it so valuable. So next time you see a photo of the statue or hear someone talk about its strange grooves, remember, you're looking at more than just an old stone face. You're seeing the edge of what we know, and the start of everything we still have to learn. The mystery matters, not just for history, but for all of us who are still asking questions. And maybe, just maybe, the best stories are the ones with no final answer. So where does all of this leave us? After everything, the arguments, the numbers, the theories, the wonder and the frustration, what do we actually know? And maybe even more important, how do we live with the things we don't? The truth is, history is full of moments like this. You get pieces of a puzzle, but never the whole picture. You want a neat answer. You want to close the book and say, that's it, mystery solved. But sometimes the story just keeps going. The statue's rain marks are a good example. They pull you in with the promise of a big reveal, but then you realise the deeper you look, the more questions you find. Think about how that feels. It's a little like looking up at the stars. You see points of light, but you can't reach them. They're right there, but also far away. That's what history's like. The more you learn, the more you realise how much you'll never know for sure. This isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's what makes the search interesting. If we already had all the answers, there would be nothing left to discover. No reason to dig, dream, or imagine. The statue's scars are a reminder. Sometimes the best part of a story is the part you can't see. The missing page. The silent witness. Let's zoom out again. Why do stories like this stick with us? Why do people travel across the world just to stand in front of a carved stone, or spend years arguing about what made a crack? It's not just about the past. It's about what the past says to us, here and now. The statue stands as proof that people have always reached for things that last. Even before writing, before cities, before books, humans wanted to leave something behind. Not just for their own time, but for the future. For strangers they'd never meet. That's a powerful idea. It means we're all connected, not just by blood or country, but by curiosity and hope. And even when the message gets scrambled by wind, rain, or time, the effort still matters. The statue endures. So does the mystery. Both are a kind of invitation. They say, come closer, look again, see what you can find. Here's another way to think about it. Every time you ask a question about the past, you're really asking something about yourself. What would I have done in that world? What would I have believed? Would I have noticed the same clues? Would I have missed them? The statue's rain marks are a test not just for scientists and historians, but for anyone who's ever wanted to know why. Now let's get practical for a second. Will we ever know for sure what made those grooves? Maybe. New tools and fresh eyes can solve problems that seemed impossible before. But sometimes questions last longer than any answer. Sometimes the best we can do is get close and accept that close is enough. That's not a failure. It's just being honest about what's possible. The world is full of things we can't measure or explain, at least not yet. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Curiosity is what drives progress. Whether it's solving a riddle in stone, or just learning something new about ourselves. Let's talk about change for a minute. Over the years, experts have changed their minds about a lot of things. Dinosaurs had feathers. The Earth isn't flat. People lived in the Americas way earlier than we thought. These were once wild ideas. Now they're common knowledge. Maybe someday the statue's rain marks will be the same way. Maybe someone will find a new clue, or think of a question nobody else has asked. But even if that doesn't happen, we still gain something. We learn how to ask better questions. We learn that doubt isn't weakness. It's a sign that we care enough to look again. That's what makes science and history powerful. Not the answers, but the search itself. Think about how many mysteries are still out there. Lost cities under the jungle, ancient scripts nobody can read, bones that don't fit the story. Every time one mystery is solved, another pops up. The statue's scars remind us that the past is always bigger than we think. Some people find that frustrating. They want closure. But there's a kind of comfort in not knowing everything. It means there's always more to discover, always another layer to peel back, always a reason to keep going. Here's something you might not notice at first. The statue isn't just an object, it's also a mirror. When you look at it, you're seeing your own questions reflected back at you. What do you believe? What counts as proof? How much uncertainty can you handle? These are big questions, and the statue doesn't give easy answers. It just sits, silent and patient, waiting for the next person to wonder. Let's talk about wonder for a second. Not the kind you outgrow, but the kind that sticks with you, even when you're older. The kind that makes you look twice, ask questions, and dream about what might be hiding just out of sight. The statue is a spark for that feeling. It's a reminder that our world is full of surprises, if we're willing to pay attention. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The statue's rain marks force us to slow down, to admit we don't have it all figured out, to share ideas, argue, laugh, and sometimes just shrug and say, "We don't know, yet." That's a healthy place to be. It keeps us honest. There's another side to this too. When we face a mystery together, it brings us closer. People from different countries, speaking different languages, all puzzling over the same scars on the same stone. That's rare. It's easy to forget how much we share, but mysteries like this remind us. We're all chasing the same questions, even if we come up with different answers, and sometimes the best answers come from outside the usual group. Someone with a fresh view, a different skill, or just a wild idea. The statue's story proves you don't have to be an expert to notice something important. You just have to care enough to look. Let's be honest, most of history is invisible, lost in dirt, erased by weather, forgotten by time. The statue is one of the rare things that survived. But even it can't tell its whole story. That's not a flaw. It's just the way things are. We work with what we have, fill in the blanks, and sometimes we just have to accept a little mystery. And here's something people often forget. Doubt is a tool, not just a feeling. It keeps us asking. It stops us from getting lazy. It's okay to say, "I'm not sure." In fact, it's necessary. If you're always sure, you stop learning. The statue's mystery keeps us on our toes. Think about the future for a moment. What will people 100 years from now think about our guesses today? Will they laugh at the things we missed? Or will they be amazed at how close we came with so little to go on? Maybe they'll have answers we never dreamed of. Or maybe they'll still be wondering, just like we are now. That's the thing about big mysteries. They last. They outlive trends, fights, even whole civilizations. The statue has survived floods, storms, and arguments. It's seen people come and go, and it's still there. The debate about its rain marks will probably outlast us too. And that's okay. There's a kind of peace in letting go of the need for final answers. It makes room for wonder, for questions, for new ways of seeing the world. The statue's scars are a reminder that the past isn't fixed. It's alive, always changing, always waiting for the next explorer. So, what can we take from all of this? Maybe it's this. It's fine not to know. It's fine to ask and not get a clear answer. The world is full of things that don't fit, don't add up, or refuse to be pinned down. That's not a problem. It's an invitation. Every time you look at something ancient, whether it's a statue, a ruin, or an old story, you're joining a long line of people who wondered the same things. You're part of a chain that goes back farther than you can imagine. That's a good feeling. It means you belong to something bigger than yourself. There's one last thing to think about. Sometimes, the questions we ask about the past help us face the unknown in our own lives. If we can live with a mystery in stone, maybe we can accept the mysteries in our own stories too. Not every puzzle needs to be solved right away. Some are meant to last. So tonight, as you drift off, remember this. The world is full of questions, and that's a good thing. Some answers will come, others will stay just out of reach. Both are fine. The statue's rain marks are still there, waiting for someone to look closer, to wonder, to dream. And maybe that's all we really need. Good night. Sleep well.